Let's see, we're going to begin or go back to Professor Camarota.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I would very much like to thank you for inviting me to testify on the impact of immigration on U.S. workers. Let me start by saying that there is some disagreement among economists about the size of the negative impact of immigration on American workers, particularly less educated Americans who work at the bottom end of the labor force, where immigrants are most concentrated and where a large fraction of those immigrants are in the country illegally. However, almost all economists do agree on this. Less educated workers have done very poorly in the labor market, really over the last 4 decades as immigration has increased. My testimony will first examine this deterioration for low-income and less educated workers. Then I'll move to some of the research that has looked at whether immigration accounts for much of that, and then finally I'll briefly touch on some policy issues. First, I would say that, again, as close to a consensus as you can have among economists, there simply is no evidence of a labor shortage at the bottom end of the U.S. labor market. If there was a labor shortage, wages and benefits and employment should all be increasing. But that's not what's been happening. First, there is a significant long-term decline in wages even before the current recession. Hourly wages for men who don't have a high school education are 22% less in real terms in 2007, before the recession, than they were in 1979. Hourly wages for men who have only a high school education are 10% in real terms less than they were in 1979, and that's through 2007, before the recession. The share of less educated workers who are being offered health care by their employers has also declined significantly. Now, maybe even more troubling, or equally as troubling, there has been a significant decline in employment among less educated natives. Just comparing 2000 to 2007 shows that the share of adult natives, 18 to 65, without a high school education, the share holding a job declined in that time period from 54 to 48%. So even before the recession, half of all people with less than a high school education who are working age were not working. If we look at people who have only a high school degree and no additional education, the share holding a job declined from 73% in 2000 to 70% by 2007. Now, of course, the current situation looks even worse. The share of working age adults without a high school education holding a job is now down to 43%. It's the norm for these folks not to work. Even those who graduate from high school, right now only 65% of working age people with a high school education are working. That means that a little over 1/3 are not working. These are historic highs. Even before the recession, therefore, there was a huge potential supply of less educated workers. In 2007, there were 22 million native-born Americans, 18 to 65, with no more than a high school education who weren't working. That number is now 26 million. And this doesn't include the 8 million teenagers who aren't working. These are people 15 to 17. Their wages and employment has also declined significantly. This doesn't include the 4 million college students who are now not working. Now, some may argue that while less educated natives were doing bad for a long time, immigrants don't do jobs that natives do, so there's really no competition. But I don't think that that argument makes any sense to economists, and just generally it doesn't make much sense. Almost every job you can name in America, the majority of workers, typically the overwhelmingly majority, are native-born. Of the 465 occupations classified by the Department of Commerce, only 4 very small occupations are majority immigrants, and half the workers there roughly are still native-born. And even in jobs for, like, for example, maids, 55% of maids are U.S.-born, 58% of taxi drivers are, 63% of butchers and meat processors are U.S.-born, 65% of construction laborers in America are native-born. So the idea that the immigrants are just doing something that Americans don't do doesn't make sense when we look at the actual data. When we look at the research on this question, we do find significant evidence that immigration is adversely affecting natives. The nation's top economist is George Borjas at Harvard, and he's done a number of studies finding harmful effects. In a 2003 study, he found that when he looked at high school dropouts, recent immigration had reduced their wages by about 7 or 8%, maybe as much as 10%. He's also looked at issues of employment, and in a 2006 study, he and several co-authors found that immigration reduced wages and employment for less educated native-born African Americans significantly. This is confirmed by other research done in 2006 by Andrew Sum of Northeastern University. My own research suggests that immigration may have reduced wages by about 10% in a number of high immigrant occupations, and that was a number of years ago. The effect has likely grown since then. In the end, arguments for or against immigration are as much political and moral as they are economic. Reducing immigration makes sense if we're concerned about low-wage and less educated Americans. On the other hand, if one places a high priority on helping unskilled people in other countries, then continuing high levels of immigration makes sense. But those who support that policy have to at least understand that doing so comes at the expense of the poorest and most vulnerable American workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Camarota.